So you have two choices. Either disqualify me, chase me away, just say, I am stopping you to operate. Or give me a license. The regulator said, I do not have instruments to license you. And then he said, so should I shut down my business? He said, I don't know. So he said, you shut me down. He said, I don't have instruments to shut you down either. And while that was going on, the virtual assets were already being consumed by the population within that country. Because when you look at a Bitcoin, for example, it's one digital currency that's not regulated by any central bank in this world. None. It just operates. So if you're sitting down waiting to regulate something that cannot be regulated, you're wasting too much time. I was attending a conference some time back, and there was something called the Northern Corridor Integration Project Initiative in 2015. To say something is happening and it's killing your business. He said, can you define how it's killing your business? They didn't have a definition either. And before they knew, mobile money was doing more good to the commercial banks than they ever thought before. So, if we sit back to regulate AI, it's already transcended the speed at which we can be able to think on how to regulate it. So, when we come to languages, and now I bring back the conversation to languages, and this was a very big discussion also I was attending another meeting in Tokyo, at the Internet Governance Forum by the UN in 2023. The G7 countries had started to be able to set standards, AI standards that the global south could adopt. And I challenged them, I said, well, I come from a country that has already set their AI strategy. So what are you, G7, trying to teach that country? Because at that time, the United States, as a big country, did not have a policy on out-of-sight drone operation. And Rwanda at that time was delivering urgent medical services using Zipline. So I said, so the G7, you're here to teach us how to do regulation for the global south? Why don't you benchmark on what we've done? So to cut the long story short, when it comes to languages, the 8 economic blocks of this continent need to be able to know what language, goes back to prioritize, what language do we need to communicate amongst ourselves so we can build data sets that can inform AI to make us deliver on a continental goal, in my view.
Thank you. Dennis, will come to you just to tee up because of time. I think let's pick up that thread. So what else do we need? And we'll use this each for your reflections or closing remark on what we need as a call to action for the Dennis, over to you.
Okay, but allow me to touch on the BSLM very quickly.
Okay, please.
Very quickly. I think just touching on the domain-specific language models, which directly affects what we're building at Jubilee, because we're currently building a domain intelligence service layer to be able to accelerate insurance penetration. So it's a direct correlation between languages vis-a-vis how we want to actually achieve insurance penetration. And then secondly, on policy, I think let's try and look at the EU, and I'm sorry if you're from the EU, what's the study there? And let's look at the US, and maybe let's look at China. In the US, we can talk about Claude, we can talk about the many models. In the EU, we'll talk so much about regulation. Okay, fine. Now let's come to Africa and let's be as pragmatic as possible. There are many myriad of problems that we are already handling at a very foundational level. So I think the most pragmatic approach is to actually handle it from a point of a maturity assessment. That's number one. And the return on investment on artificial intelligence. Let's look at the low balls and the high balls. What can we be able to achieve within a very short period of time? And what do we admit that indeed we do not have capacity to be able to deliver or achieve production, labor, and money in the pocket. When you look at the EU, perhaps for them, they worry more about the 6 principles of the GDPR. When you look at the US, they worry about target selection and war in Iran and so on and so forth. So it's quite all over the place, but we look at it in terms of the maturity assessments. My call to action would be that factually, let's go beyond what we've done before. We've talked about Maseno University setting up an intelligence center. We'll talk about Jubilee, where I'm setting up a thinking lab. I'm only hiring those who've done action papers in knowledge graphs and what's really going on even with the language models. And again, secondly and most importantly, can we be able to tie it to the economics of AI? I think, of course, when you look at it from enterprise AI, the body is very hard on you to give them money back of what they've invested before the bubble comes in. But when you look at the community, it is also tied towards the government. So the call to action is perhaps we have a unified way of being able to deliver the value of AI based on what we've been able to see that supply and amount. Thank you.
Excellent. Dr. Caroline, we'll come to you next. And Adels, I realize I cheated this question for you, and you come the other direction. So we'll go down the line and give you the last word as we go. But Dr. Caroline, over to you, the call to action in closing remark.
Thank you very much. I want to first get back to the questions that were raised, or the issues that were raised by my colleagues here. Language is for communication. And the communication is for all citizens. So whom do we target when we're talking about AI? Who is going to benefit from this? We need to decolonize AI. We need to think about decolonizing our languages, our minds, especially in the terms of the language, of the languages that we're supposed to use in all development trajectories. I can't believe that we are thinking of, okay, we empower whichever language we can use for communication. What are we doing? It brings in the issue of linguistic justice. UNESCO nowadays is emphasizing the issue of promoting all languages. Multilingualism is key for any development aspect. We should be looking at approaches that can even enable us to teach classes and the learners are able to get the content in their language that they understand. And through AI, we can easily do this. The question on the African continent has been the power struggle between the languages. Languages are always conflicting over power, status, prestige, which one is the official language, which one is the national language, and it has always caused conflict because there's the demand for instruction in mother tongue or indigenous languages, and then the policies demand that we learn in other different languages. And when we are applying or when we are using languages, the people, the beneficiaries who need access to justice, who need social services in health centers, those who need agricultural services, some of them do not even understand any of the languages that are used. When people are on the water fishing and they are maybe surveillance services or safety measures there on the ocean, they do not understand the language that is used. What can we do to build those applications, those models that can even enable languages or messages to be communicated in a language that can be understood by the citizens who need the services? My argument is we need to advocate for African languages to bridge the linguistic gap, because we are widening the gap between the global north and the global south by pushing away the African languages from the conversation. Because if we are to build AI that is focusing on the future, we also need to be part of the conversation. We also need to bring our values, we need to bring our cultures in the conversation so that they are integrated. So I believe we need to have this discussion more and think about our cultural values. That's why when you look at all these regional blocks, the issue of cultural aspects, language are critical and they're emphasized. When you go to the SDGs, you go to the AU, Agenda 2063, you come to the East African community, all our our partner states, we are all advocating for the way they can communicate to ensure that the development agenda, either at national level, regional, continental, are brought to the citizens who are supposed to benefit from the conversation.
Thank you. I'm surrounded by very exceptional people, and I don't want to repeat what I've said already. But I just want to pose a simple question. Just by show of hands, how many of us have attended at least more than one AI conference this year? Just by show of hands. Yeah, this year. Okay, what about last year? AI-related conference. I think we have spoken. We have shared. I just want to answer the question we shared. I have two suggestions. But if you attend a new conference, about two things that have come out of it. One, we need localization. Two, we need localization means our data centers. And then two, we need local content. That means AI that is responsive to actually our needs. But we have spoken about these things. And even in here, from day one, day two, and now day three, the conversation is actually around the same things. I will have two suggestions. One great professor of mine shared with me that he said, Patrick, if you need anything to move, you need champions. We have our champion. One of our champions is actually Isteco. Now, my suggestion is, how about we say, if we need a data center, let Isteco give us a business case and say, we need about $200 million to actually invest in a data center, a shared data center for East Africa. And then the next step, they say, maybe Rwanda, where Uganda says, our Ministry of ICT is committing about 20 million USD towards this. Then we now say, okay, you've supported us to organize a conference. We need a matching fund. Other East African countries have contributed about 100 million USD. We need a matching fund. Give us about 50 million. I think we need to go beyond the talking because AI is very fast. We need also to move very swiftly. The second suggestion is what I just shared earlier. Let's have our AI solve a common problem for East Africa community. But as we're solving that problem, we need involvement of member countries, at least a representative. And Isteco can do a good job in this by having a call. I had people preaching earlier here. Let's have a call that is dedicated to the East African members working together. And as they're working together, we go back to our legislators and say, there is evidence of us already working together. I can see because of time. Thank you.
All right, so like my colleague is saying, I'll kind of take one or so from you and the second one. So I think all we need to do is to just kind of like have an agreement. So data centers first are very expensive in the long run, yeah? So meaning like if we have one country specifically where we can have a data center for like each region, we're talking about the north, we can be in Egypt, or in the eastern, we can be in Kenya, Rwanda. That would really save much of like the training because it's very expensive to train the models. And also make it easier for us to develop like African context type of models. Then the other thing I would say is like, how do they say it? The thing is like we're all going to die. Yeah. What I'm trying to say is like you have an opportunity today to change, make something happen. What I would suggest is like set up a company, make the idea work, yeah, or contribute the last copy to the code, or do whatever you can to make sure that African languages are here forever. That's it.
Yeah, I think to touch on the last slide of the presentation was what you talked about. Unfortunately, I don't think there are pillars that we can afford to forego. So, for example, if it's skills, compute, data, policy and regulation, unfortunately, there's not one we can say, oh, we'll prioritize this and then we can let go of the other. However, there exist different stakeholders and whose core mission is basically specializing in those different pillars. For example, academia on reskilling and upskilling, the private sector on developing and commercializing these innovations, the government on building conducive regulatory environments for these innovations to flourish, and then as well as compute, which goes into the private sector, which would be different from, I'll take a different approach. So instead of government putting in the funds or pull the demand together at the East African level and interest the private sector is already doing this and doing this very well to come and invest in it, because a single market or a single country might not have enough demand for, let's say, hyperscale, but as a region maybe that could be interesting enough. So I think the need for cross-sector collaboration is very important, because, as I say, there's no pillar we can follow to put on the side to prioritize. So we will need to take all of those at the same time, and the collaboration between the different stakeholders that specialize in these core issues or these core pillars can enable access or the development and deployment of AI that reflects the core realities.
Wonderful. I want to just say thank you to all of my panelists here. I feel incredibly lucky to have all 6 of you in this conversation, and I do apologize if my gentle nudges of time were cutting off our conversation. But incredibly powerful discussion. I think we've re-emphasized the imperative of language, but started getting a bit more specific about where different types of investments are needed and how to think about prioritization and how to think about the next few steps going forward. So I really appreciated that we're leaning forward and being practical. I want to thank you again. I want to thank Esteko. I want to thank all of the audience members as well. Thank you for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much, Robin Miller. I think you can give a round of applause for really managing